see you. Thank you. Nice to see you. Thank you very much. I want to start by providing information on our response to Tropical Storm SIOUX. It's a very interesting name. Last week, the storm hit Puerto Rico and the Virgin Islands, and I've issued emergency declarations to support our response in both of those areas. So that's Puerto Rico and the Virgin Islands. This week, the storm passed just east of Florida. Got a little bit lucky, didn't hit Florida too hard. Working with the governor, working with everybody, but it did not hit directly, as a lot of people thought it might. It's currently off the coast of South Carolina, heading northward to North Carolina. Is expected to make landfall sometime this evening as a Category 1 hurricane. Very serious, a lot of water coming from that storm. I've already issued emergency declarations for Florida, South Carolina, North Carolina, and FEMA's personnel, and they are great. They're doing a job. They're already on the ground in all areas. Every single area that we mentioned is covered. Over the next several days, there's expected to be heavy wind and rain in the coastal areas of North Carolina, Virginia, Maryland, Delaware, New Jersey. We're working with each of those states, and in particular as it relates to FEMA, the military, law enforcement, all of the different groups that are involved. Storm surge and inland flooding are possible, and everyone needs to remain vigilant until it passes. I encourage everyone to follow the guidelines of the state and local authorities. We're working with them, and I think the guidelines have been very accurate so far, so stay safe. Next, let me provide an update on the path forward for our country as we continue our war to defeat the China virus. We're beginning to see evidence of significant progress. Nationwide, the number of positive cases has declined by nearly 6% from the week before, and the positive test rate has also dropped from 8.7 to 8% over that same period of time. An encouraging sign, very encouraging, I have to add, that the virus is receding. In hotspots across the South and West, we've seen slow improvements from their recent weekly peaks. Arizona's weekly case counts have dropped 37%. That's a tremendous drop, and the governor and the state have done a fantastic job. Down 37%. Texas down 18.7%. I was there a couple of days ago. And Florida, 21.2% drop. So that's a tremendous job that they're all doing. As we begin to contain the virus in these states, we must focus on new flare-ups in the states where the case numbers have risen, including Georgia, Mississippi, Tennessee, Oklahoma, Missouri, and I think you'll find that they're soon going to be very much under control. Meanwhile, 18 states continue to have very low case numbers and low test positivity rates, under 5%. Alaska, Connecticut, Delaware, Illinois, Maine, Maryland, Massachusetts, Michigan, Montana, New Hampshire, New Jersey, New York, North Dakota, Oregon, Rhode Island, Vermont, West Virginia, and Wyoming. It's under 5. Even in these states, however, where the virus is under control and at a very low number, Americans should continue to be vigilant, be careful, in order to prevent the new hotspots from opening up, or any new hotspots from opening up in those states. To that end, I urge all Americans to continue to socially distance, wash your hands, wear a mask when you cannot avoid crowded places, and to protect the elderly. Very, very important. Protect the elderly. It's much different. The young children have very strong immune systems. We've learned how strong they are. But protect the elderly. The average age of those who succumb to the virus is 78 years old. That's the average age. It's important for all Americans to recognize that a permanent lockdown is not a viable path toward producing the result that you want, or certainly not a viable path forward, and would ultimately inflict more harm than it would prevent. As we're seeing in foreign countries around the world where cases are once again surging, you have many places where we thought they were under control and doing a great job, and they are doing a great job, but this is a very tough, invisible enemy. lockdowns do not prevent infection in the future. They just don't. It comes back, many times comes back. The purpose of a lockdown is to buy time to build capacity, especially with respect to hospitals, learn more about the disease and develop effective treatments as we did in the United States. We're doing very well with the vaccines and the therapeutics. Countries where there have been very significant flare-ups over the last short period of time are Spain, Germany, France, Australia, Japan, and also, as you probably heard, in Hong Kong, they've had some very serious flare-ups. Japan has gone, a lot of six-fold flare-up. That's a lot, but they'll get it under control. In our current phase, we must focus on protecting those at highest risk while allowing younger and healthier Americans to resume work and school with careful precautions. Ideally, we want to open those schools. We want to open them. At the same time, we're placing an emphasis on continuing to drive down the mortality rate with improved care, treatment, and medical interventions, building a bridge to the introduction of a vaccine. The vaccines are coming along incredibly well. Today, I'd like to also provide an update on the actions of my administration and the work that we've done. We're really taking an increased interest, and we're seeing numbers that nobody can even believe in terms of percentage increase. It's telehealth for American patients. The percentage increase is being worked on right now, but it's very, very significant numbers that you would not even think possible. This has been a priority from the beginning of my administration when we launched an initiative to allow veterans to connect remotely with their VA healthcare team, and it worked out really well. We have a 91% approval rating in the VA in terms of the job we're doing. This is the first, it's the highest ever recorded. Now telehealth is a critical part of our path forward in the VA, and it's becoming a critical path, especially with our senior citizens. You don't have to go to the doctor's office. You don't have to go to hospitals. When the invisible enemy struck our shores, I took immediate action to eliminate regulatory barriers to telehealth, making it easier for patients to consult with doctors from safety and convenience, and really they have great safety and great convenience right from their homes. Today I'm taking action to ensure telehealth is here to stay. Moments ago in the Oval Office, I signed an executive order to make many of our regulatory reforms permanent. We've done some regulatory reforms that have had a tremendous impact on what we're doing, on medicine and medical and what we're doing. They can do things that you wouldn't believe, that even a year ago, 2 years ago, would not have been doable. We're enshrining the right of American patients to meet with their medical providers in a way that is best for them, and very, very convenient, and very talented people on the other side of the line, I have to tell you. The order builds upon a series of actions we've all taken to make telehealth available to all. We ensured that Medicare covers telehealth visits at no additional cost. That's no additional cost. And co-payments can be waived for telehealth services. We are working very hard also on prescription drug prices, and I will tell you that the favored nations clause that I've signed into existence, nobody thought anybody would ever do that, has a massive impact on prescription drug prices, in addition to the 3 other elements of reduction of drugs, particular prescription drugs. But the favored nations clause is massive. For instance, if Germany buys a pill for 10 cents a pill, as an example, just as an example, and the United States pays $2 for the same pill, we get the same privilege, the same right as they do. We never had that before. We paid all of the expenses, all of the research and development. So the numbers are astronomical, and as you probably noticed, big ads are taken against me by Big Pharma. Very big ads, very massive buy. But in the meantime, they're calling, they want to know if they can make a deal. And I say to people, the only reason these ads are being taken is because prices are coming down for you. And they understand that. I think our people understand that. But in particular, when you look at the matching, you could call it matching, or you could call it favored nations, call it whatever you like. it's a tremendous, it's going to have a tremendous, and I'm talking about 50, 60%, 70%. That doesn't mean it goes to 10 cents as an example, but theirs comes up and ours goes down. And you have many, many countries where their numbers, the numbers are so low. I mean, so low, and by that I mean much lower than the United States. Another thing I'm doing is if a certain country like Canada buys for very much less than the United States has bought, how they allowed this to happen, representatives of our country standing at these podiums or in the Oval Office, how they allowed this to happen is just, to me, incredible. We've been working on this for a long time. I've been talking about it with KELO for a long time, right? So now a governor like Ron DeSantis of Florida is doing a great job, or a great governor of Ohio, or a great governor of any state can call up and buy the drugs directly from Canada at sometimes 50% less. So we'll be buying from Canada. Now what the drug companies are going to do, maybe they'll raise them, maybe they'll lower them, or maybe they'll just give up and sell them to us directly much cheaper. So a lot of things are happening. Also the rebate. We have people that are very wealthy that nobody ever heard of them, nobody knows who they are. I guess in some cases they can be pharmacies, in some cases they're individuals. We're doing a rebate, and the rebate goes to the people that lowers the price of drugs. So we have a series of 4 things that we signed, and you will see over a period of fairly short period, drug prices are going to be tumbling down at numbers that nobody would have ever believed possible. We have, in 51 years, the only time prices came down was during this administration. It was last year. 51 years it went up, but that was just a small decline. This is a massive decline. This is a decline that nobody can believe. I was called by senators, I was called by congressmen, please don't do this. But Big Pharma doesn't mean anything to me other than we want them to do a great job. We want them to get their vaccines. We want them to do what has to be done. So I think you're going to see drug price reductions over the next 4 or 5 or 6 months. Probably take a little while to kick in, that are going to be at numbers that you wouldn't believe. But in the meantime, they called on Friday afternoon. They want to meet, see if they can do something else. They don't like favored nations clauses. I understand that. We've vastly expanded coverage, allowing Medicare to cover more than 135 new services through telehealth, by the way, including physical therapy, emergency department visits, home visits, mental health counseling, substance abuse treatment, which is a very big priority. We brought the substance abuse, at least prior to the China plague, or whatever you want to call it, we brought it down very substantially. Pediatric critical care and much more. Thanks to our actions, an estimated $2 billion of additional funding will support Medicare patients receiving telehealth services. So a very, very big priority on telehealth. As part of the CARES Act, we secured $200 million to help healthcare providers and hospitals expand their telehealth, and they're all doing it. They're doing it gladly. Prior to the epidemic, or the pandemic, whatever you want to say and how you want to refer to it. But prior to the pandemic, the telehealth was fine, but it wasn't anything raging. And I guess one of the only good things that we've gotten out of this whole horrible situation is telehealth has been incredible. And again, the increases are, many hundreds of times greater than it was before. Do you have a number? It's like 2,000% or something like that. It's an incredible increase. You'll get the number, but it's I think they have it now finally, and it's really an incredible. Thank you, Kaylee. We work with the leaders of major health insurance companies to ensure coverage for the telehealth visits related to coronavirus. We cut red tape to allow many services to be conducted by phone rather than video, which is much simpler, providing a much easier option for many seniors in particular. 35% of the Medicare beneficiaries who receive telehealth services, or over 3.6 million seniors, did so over the phone. So you're talking about 3.6 million seniors. That's something. 10.1 million Medicare beneficiaries have accessed care through telehealth since the beginning of the pandemic. So you're talking there, 10.1 million people. In April, over 43% of all Medicare primary care visits were done via telehealth, and compared to less than 0.1% in February. Those are part of the numbers that I think I'll have you get them. So this part you don't have to. You'll get the other section. Thank you. So think of that, compared to less than 0.1%. 0.1%. That's an incredible number. So over 43% of all Medicare primary care visits were done via telehealth compared to, so you went from 0.1% to 43%. That's an incredible, it's an incredible number. The executive order I signed today will also expand healthcare access in rural America. We take care of rural America. It directs agencies to deploy strategic investments in our rural communications infrastructure. And we're working very hard with all of the people in government that are involved with the communications infrastructure so that the telehealth gets very quick and easy access. Additionally, revenue for rural providers varies significantly from month to month, making it difficult for many to stay in business. Many are having a very difficult time. To help fix this problem, my order will create a voluntary Medicare payment system that will give rural hospitals flexibility, really great flexibility, and a more consistent income stream to better serve their patients. Furthermore, I am directing the Department of Agriculture, Department of Health and Human Services, and the Federal Communications Commission. We were just with the heads of each one in the Oval Office just before I came up to the podium, to form a task force that will break down barriers to expanding rural health care. This order continues my administration's focus on rural health care. We allocated nearly $165 million through the CARES Act to support nearly 1,800 small rural hospitals who have done an incredible job, as well as $11.5 million to expand technical assistance for rural and underserved areas. We allocated another $10 billion to 2,000 rural hospitals and more than 2,400 rural health clinics. We waived burdensome licensing, certification, and registration requirements, which took tremendous amounts of time. And these are people that had great reputations and great track records for practitioners that serve on the front lines in rural areas, allowing more medical personnel to serve their wonderful patients. We're also, in terms of PPE, ensuring that the state and local areas have the supplies they need. We've been supplying hospitals and cities and states, governors, helping governors at a number that nobody's ever heard of before. 15,440 nursing homes have received a second shipment of personal protective equipment. They're very much stocked up. They're in great shape. They all have the ventilators, all the ventilators they need. They have actually more than they need. And their equipment, medical equipment, is in very, very good shape. They're full. My administration has worked with the private sector to deliver over 100 million N95 respirators, 85 million gloves, and nearly 250 million face coverings nationwide. We continue to make the extraordinary progress that we've been talking about together on vaccines and treatments under Operation Warp Speed, which is very exciting, most exciting. Last week, we distributed 2,979 cases of remdesivir, which is proving to be extremely powerful and good, enough to treat more than 19,000 patients, had great results. This includes 500 cases for Florida, 500 for Texas, 300 for California, 200 for Ohio, and 150 for Arizona and Georgia. And those numbers will be going up rapidly as we move along. Hospitals are reporting an adequate supply of steroids such as dexamethasone that are used successfully in late-stage illness. They've been very good. We're also very encouraged about the prospects for plasma therapies, and that we're working on, and that's a brilliant art. It's really an art. And we launched a national plasma drive last week. I was at the Red Cross building with the American Red Cross and 13 other healthcare organizations. I urge everyone who has recovered from the virus to go to coronavirus.gov, coronavirus.gov, and donate plasma today. We would really appreciate it. This really makes people better. But we need that beautiful ingredient that you that got better seem to have in your veins. You have to go to coronavirus.gov and donate plasma today. It would be tremendous. We really appreciate it if you do it, because we're low. We're low. We could help a lot more people. And it would be a terrific thing. It'll take an hour, maybe a little bit more than an hour, but everybody will be very appreciative. Makes people better. And you had something very special. You had something that knocked it out. So we want to be able to use it. So whatever you can do, coronavirus.gov. As a result of improvements we've made in treatment for Americans over the age of 18, the mortality rate has declined 85% from its April peak, 85% decline. On vaccines last week, we announced a $2.1 billion partnership with Sanofi and GSX to purchase and produce 100 million doses of their coronavirus vaccine. 100 million doses. This is the sixth vaccine candidate we are proactively supporting. We're supporting numerous companies that are doing very well, having wonderful results, and they're in final stages of testing. There are now 2 vaccines in that final stage of clinical trials in America, with a 3rd vaccine likely to begin phase 3 almost immediately. And we have additional clinical trials scheduled over the next few weeks for a couple of the other companies. These are great companies. These are companies that are not only well-known, they're well-respected, most importantly. We're balancing speed and safety, and we're on pace to have a vaccine available this year, maybe far in advance of the end of the year, and we're mass producing the most promising candidates in advance so that we're ready immediately upon approval. We have our military lined up. It's logistics. It's all about logistics. They deliver a lot of things, including soldiers, but now they'll be doing vaccine. Our general is all ready to go, and he's very excited. And once we have the vaccine approved, fully approved, he'll start the process. They will start the process, and they'll get it out very, very quickly all over the country, and maybe beyond if it works as we think it probably will. By unleashing America's technical and scientific brilliance, we will end this pandemic, and we will hopefully end it very quickly. The therapeutics are very exciting to me, where you can go into a hospital, and whether it's through a shot or a transfusion, you take care of somebody and they get better. That's something to me is very important, and we're doing really well on therapeutics and really well on vaccines. So thank you all very much for being here. We'll take a couple of questions.
Thank you, Mr. President. So if I can ask your response to 2 items in the news and ask a coach question. First, have you been briefed on the incident off the coast of California where the Marines and the Navy Corps houseman died in a training accident a couple of days ago?
They're actually briefing me in a little while. We have it scheduled for a little while.
Are you able to speak to the families?
Oh, it's terrible. No, it's terrible, and we'll be in contact with the families. A thing like that is terrible.
Separately in New York today, the city prosecutor confirmed a criminal investigation into the Trump organization. Do you have any reaction to that?
Well, I just heard about this. Is just a continuation of the witch hunt. It's Democrat stuff. They failed with Mueller. They failed with everything. They failed with Congress. They failed at every stage of the game. This has been going on for 3.5, 4 years. Even before I got in, this was starting with the Mueller deal. Mueller started a little bit after, but it started with some of the people that you know very well, the names, Strzok and Page, and all of the different people call me. This has been going on. This is a continuation of the worst witch hunt in American history, and there's nothing that I know even about it. I had seen that today, just a little while ago, and I said, what's this all about? I know nothing about it, but it's just a continuation of the witch hunt. Didn't work out for Congress, didn't work out for Mueller, didn't work out for anybody, so what they're doing is they send them around to all over the country, I guess, maybe. But it's a terrible thing that they do. It's really a terrible thing. the witch hunt has gone on long enough, okay? What else?
Just one on COVID. You mentioned the vaccine development program. Could you assure the American people that politics and considerations around the election will not interfere in the science?
Absolutely.
And playing a role in just determining how the vaccine will, if there is one, will be distributed across the country? Is that something that you will do?
It's possible that I get involved, but no, it won't have anything to do with, we want to make people better. We want to send them to the areas that most need it. And I think we're going to have something very soon. It's going good. Jeff, please.
Mr. President, you said today in a tweet that Dr. Birx was taking bait from Speaker Pelosi. What did you mean by that, considering that she was just describing the facts about the case of the pandemic right now across the country?
Well, I think we're doing very well, and I think that we have done as well as any nation. If you really look, if you take a look at what's going on, especially now with all these flare-ups on nations that they were talking about. And don't forget, we're much bigger than other than India and China. China's having a massive flare-up right now. India has a tremendous problem. Other countries have problems, and I noticed that in the news, in the evening news, I never read about that in any of the news. I don't read about the other countries. You're starting to see that other countries are having very big flare-ups. Countries that thought they were over it, like we thought we might be over it in Florida, and then all of a sudden it comes back. They do come back. But I think we're doing very well. I told Dr. Birx I think we're doing very well. She was in my office a little while ago. She's a person I have a lot of respect for. I think Nancy Pelosi's treated her very badly, very, very badly, very nasty. And I'm just referring to the fact that I thought that really they should say the job we've done, whether it's on ventilators or testing. We've tested now over 60 million people. No other country is even close to that. We've tested 60 million people with great, in many cases, about 50% now rapid fire, meaning 5 to 15 to 20-minute tests where you get the result almost immediately. Nobody has anything like that, nobody. And I think we're just doing very well.
Does that mean just to follow up just quickly, does that mean you disagree with her characterization, Mr. President?
Go ahead, please.
Thanks, Mr. President. I wanted to follow up on two things that you said earlier in the cabinet room. The first was on TikTok, and the second was on coronavirus. On TikTok, you said that you wanted money for the U.S. Treasury from the sale. Does that mean you expect the Chinese company to pay the U.S. Treasury directly, or are you talking about?
Either way, whether it's Microsoft or somebody else, or it was the Chinese, what the price is, the United States should get a very large percentage of that price, because we're making it possible. Without us, you know, I use the expression, it's like the landlord and the tenant. And without the lease, the tenant doesn't have the value. Well, we're sort of, in a certain way, the lease. We make it possible to have this great success. TikTok's a tremendous success, but a big portion of it's in this country.
From the sale directly.
It would come from the sale, yeah. Whatever the number is, it would come from the sale.
And then you
Which
mentioned
nobody else would be thinking about but me. But that's the way I think, and I think it's very fair.
And you
But
mentioned
we want no security problems with China. It's got to be an American company. It's got to be American security. It's got to be owned here. We don't want to have any problems with security, etc. And something could come out. I will tell you, there's a lot of excitement, not only by Microsoft, but by other companies in terms of buying it. So we'll see what happens. But we want, and we think we deserve to have a big percentage of that price coming to America, coming to the Treasury.
then on the negotiations on Capitol Hill, you expressed some frustration, said you might take executive action to address.
Yes.
So I was wondering if you could talk about both how you might prevent evictions through executive action, and then also.
Yeah, I could do that if I want, and I want to do that. I don't want people to be evicted, and you know, when they're evicted, when they're thrown out of their whatever the place may be, in many cases they go to big shelters. And if you talk about pandemic, this is a pandemic, and they go to shelters. Number one, they're thrown out viciously. It's not their fault. It's China's fault. It's not anybody's fault. It's China's fault. But number two, and if they are thrown out, they oftentimes will go to a shelter with tremendous numbers of other people, and the virus will spread. And we don't want that.
Are you considering suspending payroll, the collection of payroll taxes?
Well, I can do that also through an executive order, so we'll be talking about that. But we're having a very good discussion with Nancy Pelosi and Chuck Schumer. The problem is they want to do bailouts of their various Democrat-run states and cities. and they want a lot of money. They want $1 trillion for that, and so they want to do much more than COVID related. They want to bail out cities and states that have been in trouble for years of bad management. In all cases, Democrat-run cities, and we don't think that's fair. You understand that. You've heard it before. Yeah, please.
Thanks, Mr. President. I wanted to ask you about the Justice Department sending federal agents into cities like Chicago as part of Operation Legend. How exactly do you envision these federal forces working alongside local police departments to help stop violence?
It's not a mass send, but it's sending very talented people to help them with the drugs and the shootings and the guns and the things that are happening. It's not like sending in the National Guard and stopping it cold, which is an example. A lot of progress has been made in Portland, but, you know, frankly, sending in the National Guard like we did in Minneapolis, it stopped it cold. From the time we sent that National Guard, they walked down the street, it was over in Minneapolis. Now it may be starting up again. These are Democrat-run cities and states, and it hasn't been a pretty picture to watch. We will help Chicago. We'll help New York if they have to request the help. But we want to stop the drugs. We want to stop the guns. A lot of the Chicago is guns, but what it is drug-related, gang-related, largely gang-related. With ICE, we send out thousands of MS-13, thousands and thousands of MS-13. We send them back, or in some cases have to put them in prison. They're too violent. They're truly violent. So we're helping out. When you look at what's happening in Chicago and some other cities with the shootings and the killings, they need help. And we haven't met with resistance, I have to be honest with you. I think it's good that we haven't. We're only looking to help them. We're only looking to help. OEM.
Thank you, Mr. President. In our nation's 243-year history, there has never been a stronger push for mail-in ballots to determine a national election.
Yeah.
Are you considering at any point issuing an executive order addressing mail-in ballots, and why do you think some people are pushing it so hard?
Well, there's never been a push like this for mail-in ballots, and if you look at the New York congressional race, which is a disaster, Carolyn, it's been a total disaster. They're 6 weeks into it now. They have no clue what's going on. And I mean, I think I can say right here and now, I think you have to rerun that race because it's a mess. Nobody knows what's happening with the ballots and the lost ballots and the fraudulent ballots, I guess. I think you probably have to take the Carolyn Maloney race and run it over again. How can you do this? And this is a small race with literally thousands of people, small thousands, and it's all messed up. You look at Paterson, New Jersey, it's all messed up. Almost every one of these, and these are small, easy to control. They should be able to do this easy. Now you're talking about like Nevada, where last 2 nights ago, they went out and in the darkness of night, without people, without having any meetings of the public, without having anything, they approved a ridiculous, you don't have to look at signatures, you don't have to approve anything, you can have double mailings, you can have all sorts of things. Nobody's ever seen anything like it. It's a disgrace. I mean, honestly, it's a disgrace. So it's a very good question. I mean, the mail-in ballots, if you look at just some of the small places, the small races, a congressional race in New York, it should be very easy. Normally that would have been announced at 7 o'clock and it would have been down to the wire and everybody would have loved it. If it was at all complex, it would have taken an extra 45 minutes or an hour. They would have announced it a little bit later. They have no clue. This was about 6 weeks ago, and they have no clue what's going on. They've lost ballots. There's fraudulent ballots. How are you going to do that for an entire nation? They're using COVID to try and get the mail-in ballots. Now, absentee ballots are great. Absentee ballots, they have to request them. They go through a process. They get them. But the universal mail-in ballots have turned out to be a disaster. And what Nevada has been doing, if you look over the last few days, you have to look at what they've done. You can have 2 ballots. You can harvest. It's harvesting. So you can take thousands of ballots, put them together, and just dump them down on somebody's desk after a certain period of time. They have something where if you vote, the vote can count up to 7 days later. Well, if the vote's going to count 7 days later, that means you know, if it depends on the one state like Nevada, that would mean simply that you can't have, supposing it's down to that one state, it could be, it's a great state, But supposing it's down to that one state, that means you have to wait 7 days. But they won't have it there. This is something that's so messed up. And by the way, I have to say, the post office for many, many years has been, run in a fashion that hasn't been great. Great workers and everything, but they have old equipment, very old equipment. And I don't think the post office is prepared for a thing like this. You have to ask the people at the post office. But how can the post office be expected to handle? They have regular mailing. And then now on top of that, they have the internet where you have Amazon and these companies doing, all the buying. Instead of going to a department store, they go buy through mail. So you have massive numbers of purchases now going through the post office, purchases of items and gifts. And that's a tremendous strain on the post office. The post office loses a fortune. It has been for many, many years, for decades. So now on top of it, it has this. And the Amazons of the world and the others, they pay very, very little money. They lose money on the post office loses money, which is ridiculous, on every package it delivers. But now on top of that, and I'm not just referring to Amazon, I'm talking about all of the competitors, if there is such a thing to Amazon. There will be, but if there is such a thing. But now on top of that, you'll have somebody like the governor of Nevada come out with this massive plan out of nowhere to take millions of ballots and send them all over the place. You'll never know who won that state. It'll get messed up just like New York and just like Paterson, New Jersey, and just like many other places. In West Virginia, they indicted a postman for doing something very bad, you know that? But there are many cases all over the country. If you look, you'll be able to find, there's a list of them all over the country, and that has to do with universal mail-in. Again, absentee is great, it works. Like in Florida, they'll do absentee, it really works. But universal mail-in ballots is going to be a great embarrassment to our country. Well, I have the right to do it. We haven't gotten there yet, but we'll see what happens. We will be suing in Nevada, and that's already been taken care of. We'll probably file something tomorrow. I do want to say that we're going to be introducing a tremendous health care plan sometime hopefully prior to the end of the month. It's just about completed now. In addition, next month we'll be doing the immigration plan. So we'll be doing that in September. We'll be doing sometime during this month the health care plan. And I think that'll be before the end of the month, and I think it'll be very impressive to a lot of people. Thank you very much.
The Postal Service says it has capacity for the elections here. Mr. President, the Postal Service released a statement saying it has ample capacity for the election. That's not true what you just said, Mr. President.
Tuesday, the Senate Foreign Relations Committee holds a hearing to look at security and humanitarian conditions in Venezuela. Live coverage begins at 10 a.m. Eastern on C-SPAN.
Obamacare will be released this month. He says next month a brand new immigration plan will be released. He's been promising a brand new immigration plan for the last few years. He's been promising a new health care plan for the last few years as well. We'll see if any of those commitments are actually made. Dana Bash is with us, Sanjay is with us, Daniel Dale, Jim Acosta. Let's talk a little bit about the president, what he said about Dr. Birx, and I want to refer specifically, Dana, to your interview with Dr. Birx. She was very forceful in saying we're entering a new, much more dangerous situation right now as far as coronavirus is concerned. And he said that Nancy Pelosi, the Speaker of the House, treated her very badly. Dr. Birx, he says he has a very good relationship with her. He just met with her, but he treated her very badly too. In a tweet earlier in the day, he said, so crazy Nancy Pelosi said horrible things about Dr. Deborah Birx, going after her because she was too positive on the very good job we are doing on combating the China virus, including vaccines and therapeutics. In order to counter Nancy, Deborah took the bait and hit us pathetic. He's calling Dr. Birx pathetic, and he was saying that Nancy Pelosi treated her very badly. He's treated her very badly in this tweet today as well.
Yes, and regardless of who is treating whom badly or not, we are in the middle of a major, major crisis. And what we just saw from the President of the United States is come out and try once again to try to whitewash it. Before his Q&A, he touched a little bit on the areas that matter the most because they're the ones that are exploding with cases across the country, especially the Midwest. But he said, for the most part, the virus is receding. It's not true. And that is why Dr. Birx said what she said to me yesterday, and that caused the president to call her pathetic. And it's why the president clearly wanted to come out today to have another one of his attempts to bend reality to the way he sees it. But that's just not going to work when you have millions of people at this point whose lives have come to a crashing halt because this pandemic is not only not in control, but it is completely out of control. One quick thing, just to kind of drill down on a specific. So he said, in response to the question about Dr. Birx, well, if you look at our nation compared to other nations, we're doing great. Well, we looked up some stats, which I didn't even have to use in the interview I did with Dr. Birx yesterday, because she didn't say that the notion of the U.S. doing poorly, she didn't dispute it at all. It is. So just for example, the U.S. as of last week, 7,982 deaths. Italy was the one that even came close with 44, Germany 30, Spain 13, South Korea 3. Now I realize that the U.S. is a much bigger country, a much bigger population, but even if you factor that in, the other countries don't even come close. Those are the facts, those are the statistics, and that is why even his White House coordinator didn't even want to go there and to try to dispute that. But the president is still trying to do that. He's still trying to will this away, and it's not going to work when it comes to the virus, and it's certainly not going to work when it comes to his politics and his reelection.
Yeah, that's an important point.
County's teachers union, public school teachers, have refused to return to the classroom as long as the COVID virus remains active, a potentially embarrassing contrast to most private schools who had already made the decision to return at least in a hybrid model. Brett, back to you.
All right, Doug, thanks. We'll follow this. Meantime, negotiations resumed this afternoon and will continue tomorrow over a new stimulus bill. You heard the president talk about that in the news conference, and the just expired supplemental unemployment benefits. President Trump says he may take his own action if necessary. We don't know what that would look like yet. Correspondent Kristen Fisher has the latest tonight from the White House. Good evening, Kristen.
Good evening, Brett. Well, President Trump just wrapped up his coronavirus task force briefing, and he spent most of this briefing talking about an executive order he's intending to sign today about expanding telehealth, especially in rural communities. He believes that this is one of the good things that has come out of this pandemic, telehealth and whatnot. But this was really just one of two big EOs that the president signed here today at the White House. Here's the other one.
Today, I'm signing an executive order to ensure that the federal government lives by a very simple rule: hire American.
President Trump signing an executive order at the White House banning federal agencies from firing American citizens and replacing them with foreign workers. But the biggest action today was on Capitol Hill, where the president's top two negotiators for the next coronavirus stimulus bill spent the day trying to cut a deal with the Democratic leadership.
It was productive. We're moving down the track. We still have our differences.
Over the weekend, White House Chief of Staff Mark Meadows cast doubt that a deal could be reached in the next few days.
I'm not optimistic that there will be a solution in the very near term.
The stickiest sticking point continues to be the extension of emergency federal unemployment benefits, which expired on Friday. House Speaker Nancy Pelosi says the number should stay at $600 a week, but the White House wants it reduced to $200. The distance between the two sides is so great that President Trump is now exploring the possibility of acting unilaterally.
I have a lot of powers with respect to executive orders, and we're looking at that very seriously.
As negotiations continue, COVID-19 is continuing to spread across the country, prompting Dr. Deborah Birx to issue this warning on Sunday.
I want to be very clear. What we're seeing today is different from March and April. It is extraordinarily widespread. It's into the rural as equal urban areas.
Earlier in the day, Speaker Pelosi said she lost confidence in Dr. Birx, and now President Trump is piling on too, saying, quote, in order to counter Nancy, Deborah took the bait and hit us. Pathetic. This comes just one day after the president's director of communications called it, quote, deeply irresponsible of Speaker Pelosi to repeatedly try to undermine and create public distrust in Dr. Birx. As the president continues to hit China for allowing COVID-19 to spread beyond its borders, he's also taking aim at the popular Chinese-owned video app, TikTok. After threatening to ban it in the U.S. on Friday, today he gave the company an ultimatum instead.
It'll close down on September 15th unless Microsoft or somebody else is able to buy it and work out a deal, an appropriate deal, so the Treasury of the United States gets a lot of money.
And despite some serious questions about how exactly that would work, during the briefing tonight, President Trump stood by it and said that he believes the U.S. government, the Treasury Department, should get some portions from that sale if it happens, Brett.
Kristen Fisher live on the North Lawn. Kristen, thanks.
Intrinsically connected, and somehow we're still sitting here August, and people are not, for whatever reason, it's not penetrating through the Oval Office, so we have to find a way forward without this leadership.
Jason, I'm curious what you... Oh, go ahead, Margaret, and then I'll ask Jason. Go ahead.
Burks is a thunderclap that should be heard because she has played along, not just enabled, but at times she's lavished Trump with praise about his attention to detail in scientific journals. I mean, really, that is laying it on pretty thick. So that should jolt him because there's no one left. Even Admiral Giroir is dumping on hydroxychloroquine and said masks are absolutely necessary. He couldn't go the last mile and say they should be mandated when he was asked, but maybe he'll get there.
Jason, what I did want to ask you is, it is true that the resumption of these briefings gives the White House press corps a chance to push the president, and now we're seeing people in that room, including some of our own colleagues at NBC and people at other outlets, going to other topics. I'm curious what you think, because on the one hand, pre-COVID, there was plenty of free press criticism of the president and the White House press secretary for dispensing largely with any press access. On the flip side, we're all familiar with the criticism of how much time should the president get. What do you think it tells us here as we go into the general election campaign that those reporters, including our colleagues, are going in there and saying, hey, all right, we heard your point on the virus, we're hitting you with questions about all these other topics?
I don't think the president's going to continue these press conferences for long, or he'll continue to ask sort of right-wing plants that are in the audience that are going to toss him softball questions about the dangers of mail-in voting. Look, this is not a president who can easily answer questions, and not a president who really deals with much criticism one way or another. And I do want to say this because it's not just from the president's tweets. We're going to see him get increasingly aggressive about anybody who stands against him, whether it's the general, Dr. Birx. If we remember back to impeachment hearings, they're probably talking right now. She's going to go through some things, as they said, for our Ukrainian ambassador. I expect that the president is going to use these press conferences to attack his enemies, not deal with the questions he's being asked, and eventually they're going to shut them down, because the more he talks, the worse he does in the polls. And that's really the lesson that they probably should have figured out from earlier this spring.
And there have been a lot of jitters over those polls. It is very early, and polls can change, but there's certainly a perception there that they need to do something about what is trailing in Biden in many key states. Dr. Patel, Jason Johnson, Margaret Carlson, thanks to each of you for kicking off our special coverage coming out of the briefing. We have a lot more planned in tonight's show, including on other topics. New York prosecutors reveal they are investigating Trump for fraud. There was a question about that at the briefing. But more importantly, we have experts to really get into what it means and why it's growing out of that Supreme Court loss on the tax case for Donald Trump. Also tonight, there is heartbreaking new video of George Floyd. This is coming into the newsroom for the first time tonight. It's the most we've ever actually seen him speak, and he's pleading with officers before that deadly encounter. We will show you that. We also have a special guest on a lot of what's happening in 2020 and all of this buzz about Joe Biden thinking about who's going to be on his ticket. All that ahead on this edition of The Beat.
Only $329 after 11% off. Start saving today with 11% off.
Fine prescription drug prices. He keeps saying that happened last year. Well, it's now 2 years ago. It was a 0.3% decline by one specific measure. And then actually last year in 2019, there was a 3% increase. So those prices are not declining. And he said something possibly too bizarre to fact check, but he said lockdowns don't prevent infections in the future because the virus comes back. The fact that the virus may have a resurgence after restrictions are lifted does not mean that the lockdowns themselves are not effective in preventing infections. So that's a strange claim, but I think it's clearly wrong, Wolf.
Yeah, you make excellent points. Dana, let's talk a little bit about the president. He says the government is going to be suing the state of Nevada tomorrow because he wants to make it easier for people to vote, because the state of Nevada wants to make it easier for people, especially during a time of coronavirus, when a lot of folks, especially elderly folks, people with underlying conditions, don't want to wait in line and show up at a polling station. He says they're going to file a lawsuit tomorrow against the state of Nevada. We'll see if that actually happens. He makes a lot of threats like that, but they don't actually pan out, as we all know. And he doesn't realize, maybe he doesn't even know, that there are 5 states that for a long time have had only universal mail-in, including Utah, including Colorado. Everybody votes by mail in those states, in Oregon and Washington State, and they've had no problems of fraud.
That's right. There are a few things here. One, let's just talk about New York, because the president was really zeroing in on New York, claiming that the problems that they're having there, and they are having problems, and this is about the Democratic primary, which has a couple of elections still ongoing, and there were real issues with the mail-in voting there. But even though there were issues, there is no evidence, and a lot of independent observers and even people in both parties are looking at this, think that they were criminal, that they were fraudulent. There are things that need to be fixed, but there aren't nothing nefarious, that, or at least nothing widespread.
Having reconstruction done?
Come back tomorrow. Cotton ball cumulus clouds floating by. 77, it's calm, there's no humidity. 69 at 8, clear later on this evening as well. Down to the 50s by midnight. Meanwhile, in Aberdeen, a few scattered clouds around right now. No wind, it's 78. 76, beautiful at 8 o'clock with a sunny sky. Starry later on this evening, into the 60s after sunset. And in Pierre, things are looking good there too. A few scattered clouds at 79. Clearing off by 8 and 10. Then a few clouds coming back by midnight. By then, temperature right around 66.
Thanks, Phil. World News Tonight is next here on KSFY.
Dakota News Now continues in 2 minutes on KDLT. Good night, everyone.
Hi, folks. This is Ron Weber with Hague Realtors. With summertime here and getting back to our new norm, real estate...
That's why it's so important that we all continue to take prudent, responsible steps. And
I'm in Maine, for example, right now, and we saw Susan Collins, Republican.
Until at least tomorrow, and just a few minutes ago, President Trump saying there are now emergency declarations here in North Carolina, South Carolina, and Florida, and the government keeping a close eye on this storm as it makes its way up toward the Northeast. Brett?
Rick Leventhal live, North Carolina coast. Rick, thanks. Shooting deaths increasing over the weekend in Chicago. 9 people killed, one of those a 9-year-old boy. The murder rate in Chicago is skyrocketing in recent weeks. Across the country, major cities are seeing a spike in violent crime. From Minneapolis, where homicides stand at 41, up from 17 last year, to Portland, which saw the single deadliest month in more than 30 years, 15 murders in July. And in New York City, 777 shootings since the first of the year, more than the city had in all of 2019. Up next, President Trump launches new ads as he trails Joe Biden in national and battleground polls. We'll bring you those. First, here's what some of our Fox affiliates around the country are covering tonight. Fox Richmond.
Mr. Trump.
Did the president ever provide inflated assets to an insurance company?
Yes.
Do you think we need to review his financial statements and his tax returns in order to compare them?
Yes.
Joining us now is the lawyer we saw right there on that breaking news day, former acting U.S. Solicitor General Neil Katyal. Good to see you, sir.
Good to see you.
You called it. You spoke at the time about the implications and the speed. Walk us through this development.
Yeah, so I've always felt like this could go very fast, and I think that's what we're really seeing already now in these court maneuvers over the last week. The last time around, Judge Marrero, the judge presiding over this case, ruled in a matter of 3 weeks. This time it's even easier, and I think it can go very fast for that reason. The Supreme Court said in that landmark hearing last month that Trump doesn't have any extra protections because he's the president. He has this
120 million Americans in the path of Isaias tonight, from the Carolinas up to Maine. And out west, firefighters battle a blaze near Los Angeles, causing thousands to evacuate. COVID concerns over crowds. Hundreds party in a pandemic on a boat in New York City with few masks. The owners arrested. A huge concert in Missouri, and look at this summer party in Illinois. The president bashed bashes Dr. Birx. President Trump calls the head of his coronavirus task force pathetic after she says the pandemic is extraordinarily widespread. Stunning new body cam video, the moments leading up to George Floyd's death. Never before heard audio. Floyd's pleas for help. A mother's heartbreak. A federal judge speaks out for the first time after her son was murdered and her husband shot 3 times in an attack targeting her.
My family has experienced a pain that no one should ever have to endure.
Tonight, the last conversation the judge had with her 20-year-old son. Gruesome new details in the case of 2 missing Idaho children. What we're learning tonight about how police found their remains on the step.
Late today, also news of a major hot air balloon disaster. The images coming in now, 3 balloons carrying dozens of passengers going down. Several people rushed to the hospital, children among them. Tonight, the federal judge whose son was shot and killed when he answered the door at their home, her husband then shot too. Tonight, her plea for protection with threats against judges on the rise. And new questions tonight after a black family of 5 was detained by police in Colorado. Video showing 4 children ages 6 to 17 ordered to the ground after their car was mistaken as a stolen vehicle. The stolen vehicle was actually a motorcycle in another state.
This is ABC World News Tonight with David Muir.
Good evening, and it's great to have you with us as we begin another week together here. And tonight, as this country fights the coronavirus, millions in the East are about to deal with yet another threat, a tropical storm that could become a hurricane just as it slams into the East tonight. From the Carolinas up through New York.
That's what we believe with the information maybe we've received, that something had occurred at that time period, but the body wasn't discovered until about 11 this morning. So initially that's what the painted picture is looking like, but it could be different, but that's what we kind of think as of now.
Can you just talk a little bit about...
And listen to the president's news conference, and it just reminds you of, there's really just one thing, it's the virus. If you get the virus under control, the economy will bounce back, people will go to restaurants, school will start again, we won't need the bailouts we need. And the problem is the president, from the very beginning, Wolf, we've been talking about this, he's actually never had a plan for...
Is going to lead off our coverage along the North Carolina coast. Good evening, Chip.
Well, Nora, Isaias is out there, and it is growing stronger. And what that means for the people here on the coast of North Carolina is that a tropical storm will turn into a hurricane sometime in the dark of night.
Tonight, the Carolinas are bracing for impact. Isaias is just hours away. The dangerous storm lighting up the sky overnight with thousands of lightning bolts. Beneath
all their COVID cases. Tonight, preparing to face a surge in patients.
The hospital is absolutely full with COVID. The ICU is, we're over capacity, the ER is, and now with the storm coming, it's just something else to deal with.
Isaias killed at least 3 in the Caribbean, knocking out power to nearly 500,000 on Puerto Rico. It could stay at or near tropical storm strength all the way to New England.
And we are starting to see those outer bands. This storm surge is expected to be 3 to 5 feet.
Right to vote. And I can't think of anything more un-American than a president who's afraid of democracy, who's afraid to let people vote. And, you know, Nevada just a few months ago in June had polling lines of 8 hours in Las Vegas and in Reno just to vote. I mean, so I guess it's like what happens in Vegas takes 8 hours in Vegas or something like that. And what Nevada tried to do is to pass a law that says, hey, you know, let's have mail-in voting, which is what the president uses, what the attorney general himself uses when he votes. And now they're saying, oh, it's fraud. And, you know, it's a really reprehensible and dangerous move. And so I don't endorse everything that I think the representative said there, but this worry about an anti-democratic president who's so afraid of the right of people to vote is something I think that should trouble all Americans, regardless of party.
Silent majority is scared of a, quote, tool being used by the extreme left.
A Biden campaign official disputes that, telling Fox, quote, "No one making under $400,000 a year will see their taxes go up, period." The Trump campaign is pressing on, though, concentrating their spending on the states that vote first and soon.
Some of those ads in will be
and it travels right up basically the 95 corridor. And notice how skinny that cone is. It doesn't fan out wide like some of the cones you've maybe seen in the past. We're certain this is where it's moving. Now, the wind speeds get lower and lower.
You can politicize gravity. You can politicize rainfall. Okay, when everything becomes politics, there's no reference point to anything. You're in a really bad place.
Stanford more than doubles the school's current endowment. It will also provide up to 10 full tuition student scholarships for every incoming class. President Sheila Gestring says the gift is important to continuing law in South Dakota, as it's the only law school in the state.
Training South Dakota's future lawyers, policymakers, businessmen and women, the law school provides fundamental service to the state in providing a critical pipeline of legal practitioners in our communities.
Families across the country whose school systems are offering in-person instruction.
I'm trying not to cry. That was hard.
Here, the kids aren't required to wear masks, but the Adams children will be wearing them anyway.
I'm sweating under this. I don't know how a 5-year-old is going to be able to handle it.
About an hour and a half to the east in Gwinnett County, Georgia, school hasn't started yet, but already nearly 300 teachers and staff are out sick. Teachers who tested positive for COVID-19 or were exposed to someone who was infected. In Mississippi and Indiana, the list of states is growing where teachers and students are testing positive just as parents are getting kids back into classes.
In my mind, I'm thinking, here we go.
In Washington, the White House Task Force coordinator is saying that all corners of the country are struggling with the virus.
I want to be very clear. What we're seeing today is different from March and April. It is extraordinarily widespread. It's into the rural as equal urban areas.
Getting that message across is a challenge. Positive rates are climbing in 25 states. California alone now has more than 500,000 cases. In New York, authorities arrested the owner of this party boat after photos showed big parties with little social distancing. In New Jersey, they believe that large parties have led to larger transmission, and now the governor is putting a limit on most indoor gatherings to 25 people.
We cannot move forward if a few knuckleheads think the rules don't apply to them, or they think they can be cute and skate by with a wink and a nod.
A vaccine can't come soon enough, and Eli Lilly is now in the final stages of testing an antibody treatment that, if it works, could be given at nursing homes and clinics until a vaccine is ready.
The hope is that this is going to be not just a defense, but an offense, and not only kind of hold back this virus, but hopefully conquer it.
Families in Georgia are saying prayers tonight for Justin Hunter. The coronavirus claimed the lives of both of his parents just last week.
Their temperature is skyrocketed. They had headaches, a horrible cough.
This antibody treatment is similar to the antibodies that come from blood plasma from people who have donated after they've gotten sick with the virus, except in this case, the antibodies are created in a lab and tested to see what works. David?
That's providing some new hope tonight as well. We'll be tracking that, Steve. Thank you. And as you heard Steve report there, what Dr. Birx said about the virus now being extraordinarily widespread in this country in rural areas and urban areas. The president lashed out at her, but he was pressed about this late today. And here's our White House correspondent, Rachel Scott, tonight.
Tonight, President Trump blasting Dr. Deborah Birx, calling her pathetic after she warned the pandemic has entered a new phase and the virus is extraordinarily widespread.
The virus is receding. In hotspots across the South and West, we've seen slow improvements.
This is the first time the president has publicly gone after his coronavirus task force coordinator, who has a West Wing office and briefs him regularly. Writing in a tweet, in order to counter Nancy, Deborah took the bait and hit us. Referring to House Speaker Nancy Pelosi, who slammed Dr. Birx for letting the president's false claims go unchecked.
I think the president is spreading disinformation about the virus, and she is his appointee. So I don't have confidence there, no.
I have never been called Pollyannish or non-scientific or non-data driven.
At his briefing late today, President Trump insisted the U.S. is seeing significant progress.
I think we're doing very well. I told Dr. Birx I think we're doing very well. She was in my office a little while ago. She's a person I have a lot of respect for.
Dr. Birx is the latest public health expert to find herself on the wrong side of the president. He's attacked Dr. Anthony Fauci on testing, contradicted Admiral Brett Giroir on hydroxychloroquine, even shutting down a nurse in the Oval Office in May over the availability of PPE.
So PPE has been sporadic, but it's been manageable.
Sporadic for you, but not sporadic for a lot of other people.
Oh, no, I agree, Mr. President.
Wearing a mask in public just 3 times, the president has fueled an anti-mask movement, embraced by Republican Congressman Louis Gohmert, who just last week announced he was positive with COVID-19. His daughter now pleading with Americans, tweeting, "My father ignored medical expertise and now he has COVID. It's not worth following a president who has no remorse for leading his followers to an early grave."
So let's get right to Rachel tonight. We heard the president there asked about Dr. Birx, but he also made news just moments ago, Rachel, as you know, on the upcoming presidential election, saying about mail-in ballots that he has the right to get rid of them.
David, the president was asked today if he would issue an executive order to stop mail-in ballots, which he claims are subject to fraud, saying he has the right to do it, but that he's not there yet. Experts say voter fraud is extremely risky with mail-in ballots. Many states are actually preparing for an increase in the middle of this pandemic, and any effort the president would take to stop it would likely be challenged in court, David.
All right, Rachel Scott tonight. Rachel, thank you. And there are images coming in this evening of a horrible hot air balloon accident. 3 balloons crashing. Several people, including children, rushed to the hospital. Here's ABC's Matt Gutman with late reporting.
You can see those 3 hot air balloons hurtling across the Wyoming landscape, the wind driving them into the turf. There's that bounce. And then the balloon baskets planted into the mud and the cries of children.
Are you okay, my family?
The local sheriff saying 17 people were transported to the hospital.
It was horrific because you've been dragged down. You don't know when it's going to stop.
Highways of America. It was just incredible to know that we were going to get to drive miles and smiles to all these people.
If you still haven't seen it, there is still time. The Wienermobile will be at the Sioux Empire Fair Wednesday, Friday, and Saturday from 10 in the morning till 4 in the afternoon. It will also be at the Summer Porch Series in Renner on Thursday and at the Canaries game this coming Sunday. A little cooler overnight and then a little cooler.
By chefs and ready in 3 minutes.
Bleeding. Also in the video, fired former officer Derek Chauvin, who's now been charged with second-degree murder. As soon as Floyd hits the pavement, you see Chauvin's gloved hands on him and a knee on Floyd's neck. With a crowd gathering, the body camera video shows King taking Floyd's pulse. According to prosecutors, he couldn't find one. There is now an investigation into the leak of that body camera video. Meantime, Nora, we still haven't seen video from the body camera worn by Derek Chauvin, who of course pressed his knee into George Floyd's neck. That video may be the key piece of evidence. Nora.
Jeff Pegues, thank you. Tonight, 7 Marines and a Navy sailor are presumed dead after a horrible training accident last week near San Diego. Lance Corporal Guillermo Perez was pronounced dead after an amphibious assault vehicle took on water and sank. 8 others whose bodies have not been recovered were between 18 and 23 years old. 2 other Marines were wounded. This was the deadliest accident involving these vehicles in recent years. Tonight, a federal judge in New Jersey is speaking out for the first time about a horrifying attack that left her 20-year-old son dead and her husband critically injured. The attacker was a lawyer and an anti-feminist who railed against her in his writings. He later took his own life. Judge Esther Salas hopes to limit access to a judge's personal information. Here's CBS's Jim Axelrod.
2 weeks ago, my life as I knew it changed in an instant, and my family will never be the same.
Judge Esther Salas detailed the shooting at her front door following her son's 20th birthday celebration.
Daniel and I went downstairs to the basement, and we were chatting, as we always do. And Daniel said, "Mom, let's keep talking." I love talking to you, Mom. And it was at that exact moment that the doorbell rang.
It was a lawyer with a grudge and a gun, dressed in a FedEx uniform.
Daniel, being Daniel, protected his father. And he took the shooter's first bullet directly to the chest.
Her husband was also shot, but lived. Her son died.
We are living every parent's worst nightmare, making preparations to bury our only child.
Salas also demanded better protection for judges, but her extraordinary poise and strength seemed remarkably focused on gratitude.
To everyone who said a prayer, it has lifted us during our darkest hours.
Jim Axelrod, CBS News.
And there is still much more news ahead on tonight's CBS Evening News.
Positivity rate. South Carolina follows with 18% as Isaias strengthens, threatening its shores. In Florida, the storm's winds force some testing sites to close for a bit.
And dry air out there will inherit a department in desperate need of fixing. David?
All right, Clayton,
They'll be cited. Brett?
Jeff Wall, live in Dallas. Jeff, thanks. Next up, the panel on the problems getting a coronavirus relief bill past the talking.
That's just Trump, to be honest.
As a representative of the campaign during these very serious times, what do you mean that you would like a, quote, bit more of a fascist Trump, end quote?
Ari, I think it's very clear. You can hear me laughing there. I'm making a joke. I'm exaggerating for a point of emphasis. And my point there was that critics of Donald Trump always claim that he is a fascist. Of course, he's not, and he's not even close. But I was making the point that we actually, in my view, and by the way, I was not working for the campaign at that time. This was my radio show a few months ago. But I was making the point that, if anything, I think we could have used a more forceful response against violent protesters across, not protesters, violent rioters across the country who were harming cops, attacking innocent people, and destroying businesses around this country.
You're making a bit of a joke defense, and people can take that at face value or not. Fascism, though, does refer to the government's use of force and power, and you have, of course, protests about government at the federal and local level. The Trump administration is not in charge of Minnesota, but government use of force, and some of it we litigated in the courts.
And the point
as potentially
is that
murder. So you can understand, Steve, why someone hears that and says, "What do you mean more fascist?"
No, well, look, again, clearly I was kidding. I was with a caller on talk radio. You can hear me laughing. Look, and the dailies, I give absolutely zero credence to it. It's a fake publication full of a bunch of activists masquerading as journalists, tried to make a story about this. I am not the story. The point I was making there on my radio show, though, was that the critics of President Trump love to lob these ridiculous accusations at him. For example, that he's a fascist. And here's my point. Here's what I would tell you conclusively from today, Ari. They are going to call us racist no matter what we do. They're going to call us fascist no matter what we do. So my answer is, let's just do the right thing. Let's pursue the right policies from here, and let's ignore these kind of nattering nabobs of negativism, if I can channel a phrase from way back in the 1970s from people like the Daily Beast.
Well, look, no one in this interview brought up racism or the Daily Beast, but you're free to use your time how you see fit. And again, I appreciate you taking the questions. Steve Cortez from the Trump campaign, I hope you'll come back.
Thank you.
Thank you, sir. Up ahead, we fit in a break, and then we have some news on this George Floyd body cam video. This is becoming public for the first time, and we have an important expert on what these tapes could mean for those open cases against the officers.
Please don't shoot me, please, man. I'm not gonna shoot you. Step on face away. I'm gonna get out now, man. Please don't shoot me, man. Please, man. I just lost my mom, man.
The Martins here, just real.
Already in effect until 2 a.m. Coastal areas of South North Carolina. Flooded roads already, closed down in Charleston. High tide is at 9 p.m. with a full moon. Surge is now lifted and increased 3 to 5 feet in this coastal area. So I'm leaning toward the high end of this. For the first time, we're seeing the moisture wrap around the center. So that means it's getting stronger and most likely will be a hurricane before landfall. give or take an hour around midnight near the border of North and South Carolina. But you're not going to know the difference between a 73-mile-per-hour tropical storm and a 74-mile-per-hour hurricane. Here's the problem. Notice the rainfall out in areas of the Midwest. A vigorous cold front is going to take this system and move it toward the northeast. When that cold front meets up with Isaias in the New England area, in these big cities, we're looking at tremendous winds. These thunderstorms are going to grow in heights, drop unbelievable amounts of rain. Maybe not for New York City, more inland, but it's the winds. We're looking at a forecast for Philadelphia tomorrow afternoon, 60 to 65 mile per hour winds. New York City, get this, 65 to 70 mile per hour winds. Widespread power outages. Well, this will be the greatest wind event New York City has seen since Superstorm Sandy almost 8 years ago, when JFK had a wind of 69 miles per hour. For the first...
and freshness.
At Northern State after the university announced a new gift from Avera. The undisclosed donation comes as the area continues to navigate the COVID-19 pandemic. Northern State will be renaming 2 buildings with the gift. The Student Center will be now known as the Avera Student Center, and the Strength and Conditioning Facility in the Barnett Center will now be named after Bob Olson, a longtime coach of the university and a former member of Avera's board of directors.
So I talked to my doctor and learned Humira is for people who...
Out of your busy day, it's for the Hoover community and the viewers that are watching. We really appreciate it. That's all.
Candidates coming. Some who are progressive and some who are not.
In a couple of states, but bottom line, Joe Biden has a lead nationally and in all the states that count. Trump is just not where he wants to be. And in terms of defining Biden as a tool of the radical left, there has been tens of millions of dollars spent by the Trump campaign to try to do that, and so far it hasn't stuck.
Yeah, we got some new ads just trying to do that as well. But you look at this coronavirus risk levels across the country, Chris, a 7-day kind of rolling average, and you see really the only green spot, which is the state with the less than 1 case per 100,000 people, is Vermont up there in the corner. So getting coronavirus under control is going to be a big part of this election, no matter how you look at it.
If Donald Trump and his party continue to make a botch of this coronavirus relief package, this yet another lock will be closed against their chances in November. As people are very concerned about this, they are failing to deliver as the party substantially in power on the matter of concern to the most people. The fact that this administration is talking about anything or doing anything that is not about getting a deal over the finish line with Democrats right now suggests to me a level of unseriousness that is not matched up with what their campaign manager was talking about today. He gets it. I don't know that the president does.
But Chris, what about the Republicans who say, hey, listen, the Democrats specifically don't want to negotiate on these things because they don't mind the fallout from a deal not being across the finish line?
Well, if life were fair, that would be a germane point.
Byron, go ahead.
Well, this is the same dynamic we have seen in a lot of big spending fights, which is, first of all, they need to extend these enhanced unemployment benefits. They need to extend PPP. They need to do certain numbers of things. And the Democrats have simply said, well, we're for all that, but we have all these additional demands, like $1 trillion for state and local governments. And they know, I think, in the end, that they'll end up getting some of what they want simply because of the enormous pressure to provide this needed relief.
Arrest from being released. Now, as mentioned, this is disturbing stuff. The videos begin with one officer knocking on Floyd's car window, and then this escalates as the officer actually, you'll see at this early stage, pulls out a gun, and we hear Floyd begging the officer not to shoot him.
Stay in the car. Let me see your other hand. I'm sorry. Let me see your other hand. Both hands. Put your hands off right now. Let me see your other hand. I got shot the same way as I was before. Okay, well, when I say let me see your hands, you put your hands up. Step on and face away. Please don't shoot me, please, man. I'm not going to shoot you. Step on and face away. I'm going to get out, man. Please don't shoot me, man. Please, man. I just lost my mom, man.
These new videos provide new evidence about how quickly police were escalating the interaction. You see the gun drawn there, despite the individual, the suspect here, being clearly unarmed. Another part of these newest videos show the officers trying to move Floyd initially into a police car.
Stay on your feet and face the car door. Please. Hey, man. Don't leave me by myself, man, please. I'm just claustrophobic. That's it. Oh, you're still going in the car. See, God, I'm gonna die in here. I'm gonna die, man.
One of the arresting officers, Derek Chauvin, has been charged with murder. Other officers face the charges of aiding and abetting murder. We should note, we do not know who leaked this particular video. It was first posted by the Daily Mail. It does overlap with, and thus appears verified by, the body cam video that was seen by NBC News and is part of the video from Officer Thomas Lane's camera. We turn now to Mark Claxton. He's a retired police detective and director of political affairs for the Black Law Enforcement Alliance, with expertise both on policing and civil rights issues. Like so much of this, it's tough to watch. What do you see as important here in this as new evidence?
I think it's important that Mr. Floyd was obviously a tremendous degree of stress and discomfort, and that could be for various reasons. And I think it has to be incumbent upon the professional police officer, and their response has to be based on the actions of the other individual. But I think police officers have to respond with a knowledge and understanding that there are times when you may have a person who is suffering from some psychological discomfort. There may be a language barrier. There may be some physical impairment. There may be even deaf or mute sometimes, and you have to adjust your approach accordingly. What you cannot do is to exacerbate situations. You should de-escalate at all costs and be very mindful of some extenuating circumstances. Mr. Floyd indicated at some point several times during the course of the exchange that he was claustrophobic. I know from personal experience I've had a similar situation with apprehending or arresting a person who was severely claustrophobic. So that has to be a matter that a police officer has to take into account and understand and decide how you're going to handle that situation.
Let's take a look at one other short excerpt from this new leak. Take a look.
I can't believe this. I can't believe this. I can't believe this. I can't believe this, man. Mama, I love you. Priest, I love you. You got mama? My kids, I love you. I'm telling you.
Given that, in contrast to many cases, this is now open, moving towards prosecution of the officers, with about a minute I have left in our broadcast, your view of whether this adds to prosecutors' evidence?
Yeah, I think there's tremendous probative value in the video itself, and I think it's important. It will be important moving forward. And I think it's also important for us to understand that even of all the videos that we've seen very little as far as a police officer's justifiable use of that level of force. If you could ever justify using 8 minutes of compression against a person and disabling their breathing, if you could ever justify that, nothing we have seen thus far would even offer any justification for it. And there's nothing also in the 21st century or even 20th century professional police training. It's all disturbing, it's all painful, it's all hard touch, but it's not the dark realities of policing at this time and how it pertains to Black and brown communities especially. This death is unavoidable, and the video that's come out thus far has only validated that position. This is all avoidable, and we have to keep that in mind as we move forward.
Understood. And Mark Claxton, we often rely on you on these stories. We have for years. I thank you for joining us on what, again, I told viewers is a tough one. Our thanks to Mark Claxton, everyone who joined us. That's The Beat. Don't go anywhere, because the readout with Joy Reid starts now.